when the sky is high. No reason to stay on ground. Lift your hands and you can touch and fly.
Hello and welcome to the Aviatrix book review. I'm Liz Booker. My guest today is a pilot, an award-winning author, and a hydrogeologist with a Master of Science in Geological Studies. She also studied engineering and worked as a university professor, supported projects at the Air Force Flight Test Center, served as a design engineer at a civil engineering firm, and has done computer modeling and field studies as a hydrogeological consultant. She's the author of 8 books, including Under the Radar, a taking risk novel, which is the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for April 2022. You can find her at her website and on social media at Sandy Parks Author. Sandy Parks, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so excited that you're here. I can't wait to talk to you about this book and all of your other work. But before we get started, I was wondering if you'd be interested in doing a reading for those who might not have had a chance to read the book yet.
Oh, I'd love to. All right, let me 2 seconds and I'll pick something out here and I'll give you a little introduction. This in this story where I'm going to do the reading from is a little bit into the story. It's where the heroine, her name is Joni, and she's met a little boy that she thought was just kind of a kid who was different, and she hasn't quite figured out why yet. But later in the story, we'll figure out that he is autistic. Turns out he is what she needs to rescue, or has come into the country to get out. And now she is starting to realize that there's something about that. And she is trying to escape a house in South Africa where the bad guys are showing up, and the person that she's with has taken off to kind of encounter them. And he sent her and the boy out the back door on their own. Of course, nothing is ever that simple, as she's just heard a helicopter coming in from overhead, and that's where we're starting.
Awesome.
All right. Run, Joni yelled. Sipo's long, dark legs blurred under him as he ran across the open space towards the baobab tree. If they were lucky, the helicopter would head for the farmhouse first and not notice them in the distance. A chopper appeared on the horizon above the distant treetops. Luck wasn't with them. Unease spread through her. One glance at the offending machine pegged it as a tadpole-shaped Alouette 3, a military-type helicopter flown by the Air Force of Zimbabwe. Only this one had no markings, no tail numbers, nada, not even advertising for a Victoria Falls tour or safari. Someone had power to utilize a helo to recover a mere boy. Out of a good 100 plus AFC aircraft, the briefing had reported only 20 were operational due to embargoes, lack of spare parts, servicing requirements, and expensive aviation fuel that had to be imported from South Africa. Civilians in these parts didn't fly Alouettes. The info in Sipo's head must concern a person high up in the government pecking order. Lemon and the CIA probably knew that too. She and Sipo had nowhere to go but forward toward the baobab. The rhino fencing ran off to their right, and the chopper closed in from the left. She kept her eyes fixed on the craft as they ran. It approached with the nose and tail a bit skewed along the line of flight. Years of flying gave her good reason to guess the pilot must be short on training hours. He crabbed like a novice. The crew door slid open as it passed overhead for high recon. Blasts of air from rotor wash kicked up dust and dried grass. Sipo shielded his eyes and slowed down. As the helicopter moved away, he looked up, disoriented by winds and noise. Keep moving, they're coming back. Her voice had risen from a yell to a scream above the din. His glazed expression left her fearing he'd curl up and withdraw again. At all costs, they didn't want to stop like frightened animals when the chopper hovered above. Movement meant safety. She retrieved a soft cloth from her pocket, normally used for sunglasses. A quick tug left her with 2 small pieces. She scrunched one up. Sipo, this will make the noise quieter. Mesmerized, watching the chopper, he let her stuff a piece in each ear. Done, she stepped between him and the chopper to break his focus. Come on, we can beat them out. They moved again towards the baobab. A man dangled his legs from the Alouette's door as it swung back over for a low pass. He leveled a rifle at them. Ghastly scenarios played in Joni's head. She shoved aside thoughts and went into action, prodding Sipo ahead. The pilot slowed and hovered a mere 20 feet above the ground, driving them toward the fence. With a good 1,000 feet to the baobab tree, they'd soon be ducks in a shooting gallery. The increasing rotor wash rushed down and out from the chopper, pushing them along and sending Britt airborne. She grabbed Sipo by the hand and cut away from the fence. The air blast knocked him over. She steadied him on his feet and yelled over the deafening noise, "Zigzag to the tree." Sipo covered his ears and shook, simply trying to keep his meager frame upright under the increasing wash. She did her best to shield and push him along. The helo pilot worked to orient the crew door to face them, but the craft drifted away, another result of poor training. The pilot struggled, and she planned to make his problems worse. As the chopper crept back toward them, something thudded to the ground near Sipo. Confused, he grabbed onto her. "Don't stop, Sipo. We almost have them beat. Get to the tree." They made another 100 feet before another missed shot plugged the ground. They weren't shooting bullets, but darts. With the pilot's unsteady controls and their erratic movements, picking off Sipo with darts would be like hitting a bounding antelope, tough and near impossible. Sipo turned and, with his arm shielding his face, looked back at the helicopter. He pointed and said something she couldn't hear. Her hat blew off and hair whipped against her eyes. She prodded him on, but he pulled her down to his face. "Net, Miss Joni." It took a second for the word to register. The guy in the door had exchanged his dart gun for a rifle with a large cone-shaped flare on the end, a net projector. She scooped up Sipo by the armpits and half dragged him toward the chopper tail. If this guy flew as badly as she thought, the hardest thing for him to do would be to back up or turn 180 degrees in place. Before the man could fire, they found temporary shelter underneath the chopper. She huddled over Sipo and folded her hands like a megaphone around his ear. "Be ready to run again. We're going to win this game." The shaking she felt under her hands said he didn't seem convinced. She wrapped her arms around him and tried to shelter him from flying debris. Seconds ticked by as the wash beat down on them and her tension pulsed with each heartbeat. The rotors kicked up power and the chopper lunged forward, moving away and leaving them in a cloud of dust. "Run!" She angled Sipo toward the tree and the fence. They covered twice the distance they had lost as the chopper gained altitude and distance in order to turn around and come back. Almost to the fence and 50 feet from the protective limbs of the baobab tree, the chopper caught up to them again. The projector fired, spiraling the net towards them. The spinning padded weights pulled outwards, spreading open the mesh. It slammed into her back, knocking her and Sipo down. The impact stole her breath, but she rolled over, surprised at her freedom. The net only partially covered her body. The rest hung on the fence. "Akili Nisidi," Sipo screamed, struggling in the net and further entangling his legs. She shoved off the net off her and crawled to her feet, yanking the nylon mesh with her and pulling it off Sipo. The darts would start flying any second. Terrified, Sipo curled his arms around her neck and lassoed his legs about her waist. She tried to run, but even as slight as he was, there was no way she could carry him far. The pilot struggled to keep the chopper away from the fence and the tree and again began drifting. She and Sipo had to take this opportunity to make it to the tree or the game was over. "We've beaten them again, Sipo. The chopper missed us and is moving back." She pressed her cheek against his and did her best to sound confident. "But I can't run this way. You must help me." Something about her commanding words or tone didn't sink in. He clung tighter. They only had seconds. "Ian wanted us to make it to the tree. I know I can do it. What about you? Do you think you can make it? Ian will catch up soon." The little game player looked frightened, but nodded yes. Sipo slipped from her hold to the ground and stood. Poor kid. None of this was his fault, yet he was paying the price. "Stay between the tree and the fence. The chopper can't reach us there." Hand in hand, they ran to the tree. I'll go ahead and stop there.
That was such a good passage that really kind of like represents so much that I love about the book. First of all, obviously, helicopter flying. And what's not obvious in this passage is that, well, maybe it is. Joni is a helicopter pilot, so she knows what good helicopter flying is and isn't. And so I love those bits of it. I also, listen, we're going to talk about more of this when we get to the writing part, but the action scenes are so well done, so intense. The pacing is so great. So we'll talk about the craft of that later on. And then this, obviously, this passage kind of gave us a feel for the setting that we are in Zimbabwe now, that we started off in South Africa, which I thought was a really fascinating place to set this in, and educated me on a lot of things that culture is like, and the terrain especially. So I really loved it. I appreciate you writing it and having a female helicopter pilot as the protagonist, of course. I want to know how you got here. So tell me about your background. In the introduction, I mentioned that you're a it's even hard for me to say, hydrogeologist by trade. But so what brought you to aviation, and what brought you to writing?
Well, I always wanted to fly. When I was a kid and I was young, my dad was a pilot, and we had gone flying with him when we were 4 or 5, pretty young. We lived, well, my dad was military, so we lived all over. But I remember flying with him when I lived in California when I was a kid. And from what I was talking to my dad a couple of years ago about that, he goes, "Yeah," I said, "that was not a good day to go flying. It was pretty stormy, and it was pretty iffy getting us where we had to go, but we did it anyway." And my dad was a professional pilot. He was in the military and served, I think, 30 years in that. And he flew in Vietnam, and he's flown so many different kinds of aircraft. So I've always been interested in the aircraft he flew, as well as what my family's done today. Kind of fast forward to that, my brother wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, so did I, but they didn't let women in back when I was getting ready for that kind of thing. And he went to the academy and wanted to fly. His eyes at the time were not good enough, and they did not do the changes that they do today to your eyes. They didn't have the fancy LASIKs and all that kind of thing. And even if they did, they wouldn't have allowed it and for you to be in the cockpit. But he went on and became an F-111 navigator. In the meantime, I met my husband right near the end of college, and he was a pilot in my dad's squadron. And of course, you wouldn't think that I would have anything to do with that, and I hadn't, but my mother set me up on a date with somebody's boyfriend, somebody, her best friend's girlfriend's boy, or whatever it is. So, I mean, I didn't really know who this guy was, and he showed up, and turned out he was an engineer. And I kind of liked that, because we actually, on our first date, talked engineering stuff, which was kind of nice. And mostly because I'd just taken an exam, and I had a friend die that week. And so I didn't get much studying done, and I didn't do very well on it. So I was kind of moping about that. So we went on this thing, and he goes, "Well, what was your test about?" So we got talking about, stress and strain and just normal little stuff like that. And I found, kind of a kin with him. And so we continued to date. And then eventually we got married. He went to test pilot school. And of course, with nothing to do but kind of follow him through test pilot school. There's a lot in between all this, but what my graduate degree in, we deal with fluid flow, which is very similar to airflow. And so we found there was a lot of similarities in learning things that we did. And so he went to test pilot school, and I was one of the few people that didn't have kids there. And so it was flying paradise, and I've always wanted to fly. So I asked my husband to take me up for a few flights to see if I liked doing that kind of thing, because he's a CFII, still is. And we had like one flight, and we landed, and I was in tears. He was angry as anything. And we said, "I don't think this is going to work." So he got,
"Oh no,
he said,
that's not what I was expecting."
I'm going to find you a big, mean old Marine to teach you to fly. So over at the club, there was this guy. He was a Marine. He was like 6'3". And I think he'd been a helicopter pilot too, actually, at some point. But anyway, so he taught me to fly, and all was well. Now, instrumentation with my husband, piece of cake, because I've been in so many situations with him in the clouds, and you pop out right over the runway. I'm going like, this guy knows his stuff. But that's just a thing. If anyone is hoping that a relative, whether you teach your husband or your husband teaches you, think twice about it.
I would never do that with my husband. I'm telling you right now, I would never.
It's not a wise idea. So anyway, that's where I got into flying. It was out at Edwards Air Force Base in test pilot country. And oh, the stories were wonderful. The things you would hear from old timers. You would go and drink in Pancho's bar, Pancho Barnes, and drink in her bar. And this was the original one, not the original, but the more current one. Now they've moved it into kind of a different place and everything. But so that's why I got interested in aviation. And my sons are both pilots. My husband's a pilot. My father's a pilot. My niece is a pilot. And she's a C7. She was a C-17. Now I think she's doing 135s. She went and did training, taught at one of the bases for a while. So she taught, UPT for a while and did that too. It's just everybody flies. So if you don't fly and you sit down at, a meal or you get everybody together and a family reunion, you better talk flying.
And then what about the writing?
Well, my sister was the first one who started. She is actually today, she writes mysteries. She wrote a romance way back in I think it was 80s maybe. And it was back when she just mailed it in and somebody picked it off the slush pile, read it, and offered her a contract. Don't expect that to happen today. I'm not saying it won't, but most of the time you can't even get in front of an editor just to, unless you've met them personally or something like that. She wrote that, and I was working, and my husband was moving from one place to the next. So holding down jobs was kind of hard. I had 2 kids in there. He was going to go to DC for a year and then go on to come down to Florida where we live now. And I thought, well, I'll just do something else. I'll write a book, because I've always had these ideas in my head. When I was teaching at the university, I'd often be writing scenarios for labs, like, a lot of mine, I did a lot of environmental stuff and environmental engineering also. So sometimes you would just write scenarios and then you'd let your graduate students loose on them, where, you have like a city council meeting, you've got a major earthquake, you've got oil shipments coming in, you've got a college stadium with a big tournament planned, and, landslide prone housing below cliffs.
All of the makings for a thriller.
So that's kind of how I got into practice writing on these scenarios. And so I thought, hey, let's just write a book. And I was kind of interested in writing thrillers. I actually wrote a romance first, which was a historical romance with my sister, in order to try to get an agent. It worked, kind of. I have a different agent today, though, so that's another story down the line. I really wanted to write kind of action, adventure, thriller kind of things, but I also, one of the things I do is every book I write, there is a plane in it someplace. I can't help it.
That's so great. Well, so tell us about this book. Why did you write it?
Well, Under the Radar kind of came out of, I had just recently been to South Africa. And it's just such a fascinating place. The people are fascinating. The politics are fascinating. The landscape is just amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And the animals there are just so unique. And, like I said, some of the political things I noticed were, the problem with Zimbabwe next door that they were having, and some other changes that were going on. So there was a new line that was opening up, and it was called Bombshell. And they were kind of wanted to write, they were looking for books that were kind of action adventure, some romance, but really a hot gal in the lead is what it was. So it's kind of like a men's action adventure, but done for women action adventures, it's kind of market. It lasted about 3 years before they decided it wasn't working for them. In the meantime, I wrote this book. So I thought, well, that'll work. So I wrote it and I sent it into them and they bought it. And then it takes about a year and a half for a book to come out. It's not like today's instant, I'm done. It comes out 2 weeks from now. Don't we wish, right? So they had it for about a year and then the line closed down. So in other words, they decided they weren't making enough money. So they, off the line. So it never came out. So they let me keep the prepayment they gave me and sent me my rights back, so I could do what I want with it. So at that point, I kind of put it on the back burner. And later, when I started True Airspeed Press, I went ahead and put it out myself. And I had somebody do my covers for me and format and stuff. Now I've learned how to do all that. So in the future, I can do all that more easily myself. And so I'll talk about that in the writing section. But that's how this book came about. When I republished it, there was a lot more romance in it. I took some of that out. There's still quite a bit in there to take it all out would have changed the whole storyline. That's how this book came about. And I love to read about countries. And so I read a lot about Zimbabwe. My husband had spent time in Zimbabwe, and it's kind of a very sad story in a lot of ways, because it's gone downhill since a long time ago. Things were going well, and then things weren't going well. When you have dictators that kind of change over time, things don't always go so well. So anyway, it was fascinating, and so I chose it as my kind of challenge country. In the old days, when a lot of these stories were written, the action adventures or romantic suspense and some other kind of things like that, people would often put it in Africa and they'd make up the country. It was easier. You could do your own politics. You could make your own good guys and bad guys. I get fascinated by what's real. And so I figured, let's just use a little bit of that and then twist it into our own story. So that's what I did.
Well, I just find all that fascinating, like especially hearing about the inception of ideas for fiction writers in particular, because I pay attention to the way that I take little bits of my experience from all around and create a story and characters and all of that, in my books, or I have 2 that I'm working on, and then the ideas for many more. So it's always fun to hear, like, where did these ideas come from? How do you weave them in? One of the things I wanted to point out, because I knew that you have a geology background, and it was very distinct to me in your description. So like on page 89, I don't have I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see. There's this one passage. This is actually like after this helicopter scene that you mentioned, and they are getting close to finding some shelter in this huge action scene that goes on at the beginning of the book. And there's just this little description: a cleft in the hill exposed thick slabs of granite, worn and separated along fracture lines. The weathering deposited crunchy granules of rock and sand along their path. As she rounded a giant boulder that had fallen from above in past centuries, she lost sight of Sipo. And I just was like, oh, yep, that's the geologist writing there, because we have this gorgeous description, but it's so detailed of these rocks. And you do it in other places too, where you talk about the color of the dust and those kinds of things. And it really lends like a lot of richness to the story. It's very vivid. And then, like I said, the action and the romance, all really good. So what else? Who inspired the character Joni? Like, where did you draw for inspiration on her?
Gosh, I've met a lot of women that have been flyers since early days on, and I just have always looked up to women that are willing to, do something that's a little bit risky. I went into a field that was mostly men, not very many women. And, you do live through a lot of these little kind of hassles. And I'm more one of those that just kind of tries to ignore it and go with the flow, So I'm not someone who gets totally chagrined at things. But I mean, I've been left standing in a professor's office when they storm out saying, we don't want women in our field, and you're just sitting there going like, okay, that's interesting. So
well, guess what? I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. So, and I've kind of written it off to that there's just people that are jerks and anywhere you are, but there's also a lot of very supportive people in the world and in every career. And I think that those are the kind of people we need to hunt out and hopefully be lucky enough to meet and work with. And, that's the kind of things you look like in life. But for example, I met a gal who in test pilot school, she was the first female test pilot. And I have a lot of respect for her. She had a lot of tough things to, tackle in her life. And she didn't do them all perfectly, but you know what? Neither have I. So I always figure, people that make mistakes are sometimes the people that can be the most sympathetic to your causes and, other kinds of things. So, we always expect perfection in ourselves and it's not always there. And this story, Joni, she actually failed at a mission before this one and it cost the life of a kid. And so she's got out of the military because she couldn't really deal with that very well. She just felt like she let herself down and let other people down. And it was more than that. She actually ended up on the ground with this kid after an accident. And for a month, she lived with him in the jungles of, Colombia. And it was not till the very end that she couldn't save him. So she felt that she failed. So she, just really booked out of there. She was, looking for jobs, got one offered to her in South Africa to look at this new special forces craft to fly. And, all these little things come from little ideas. I had to come up with, well, what's she flying? And, not really wanting to do helicopters, except for she was a helicopter pilot. And, that's not my specialty, as you know. But
It's not obvious in the writing at all.
It's like anything. You try to learn as much as you can about what you're going to do. So I talked to a lot of people. I got a lot of help with, ideas. I want to do this. What do I need for it? What do I need to know? And then having a little bit of aviation background helps some. It just makes it all make more sense to you when you talk to people and they tell you stuff. You kind of get a better idea of what they're telling you. So I came up with an idea. I'd seen something that had come up on the news about something called a Carter craft. And so I kind of read about it and said, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if I could twist the, technology here, and we're just maybe a step farther with that. And, came up with an idea to build her little, one-seater craft that could go faster than what a normal helicopter could, just a little bit, because of the way it was designed. And there's always a limit on how fast rotors can go before they lose their ability to produce lift or don't get destroyed or whatever. And
retreating blade stall.
Retreating blade stall. There you go. See, you're the helicopter person. It's also been like about 10 or 12 years since I wrote this book. So those little details start to kind of disappear from my mind. So I came up with this idea to kind of give her this little craft that she would, be supposedly test flying. And it was, kind of a, spur of the moment kind of thing where they decided to send her on this trip, kind of mostly built on that they needed money to continue the project. And so anyway, so the CIA gets involved with this, what's going on, because the Americans are partially involved with the development on this too. That's kind of how we got the story going. And I've been on ranges where you go into animal preserves. And part of the time we spent in South Africa was on a preserve also, seeing what they do with the animals. And, a lot of them actually produce animals to give to other countries. And some of them even produce them for hunting, which is, kind of scary, but that's just part of the world. It keeps them producing some of these very unique animals that and gives them a safe place to do it in. So I got interested in that and thought, well, why don't we put this take place on a preserve in Zimbabwe, because they did have them. There's not many of them left, if there's any left today. Back when this book was written, they were kind of falling apart at that point. And so that's where I set the story.
Well, I just want to go back to Joni for a second, and what you were talking about being a woman in your field, mostly around men, some of whom are less than welcoming. And in my own writing, I'm writing books for young women, and I want to inspire them to be in aviation. And so, my book isn't going to center around that kind of hostility. However, in my books, I have already mapped out even the one that I've already been working on and the ones that I want to write in the future, for each of these characters to encounter a moment at some point in the book where they're confronted with the weird things that happen to women in aviation. And the reason I'm doing that is, first of all, because it's true, but also it's a way to give them an example of how you might be able to respond in that situation. Because I'll be honest with you, I didn't always respond to those situations that well. I left that situation, kicking myself for what I could have, should have said. And so I wanted to give them these tools to at least be thinking about it, because when you live that experience through somebody else, it prepares you to potentially deal with it yourself. And so this is what I love, what I'm getting to about Joni, is that she is just this, I love women who are witty and on the ball enough to be able to like snap into those situations and take people on in the moment and do it with confidence, and then just kind of like give it right back to them as hard as they're giving it. And Joni is this character. She's hilarious. She's strong. She's got a great sense of humor. She can hang with the guys, no problem. And I love that about her. So thanks for creating that character.
She always says the things that, you think about 10 minutes later after the person has left, and you're going like, I should have said.
Exactly.
Being a writer, you can fix all that. You can do it immediately.
I know. I love that. So you kind of talked about your research, but were there things that were harder for you in the research to, tease out? Like, what did you struggle with, and how'd you get through those?
Some of the hardest stuff was, I would say, the political climate within Zimbabwe. And, and there was things that I didn't have time for. I wish I could have brought out my South American characters a little bit more. But some of it's when you're writing, what you know at the time, who you know at the time. And I know so many more lady pilots, people that are more worldly, probably people from South Africa now than I knew then. So like I have a really nice South African friend who she puts up little things about words every day that are words they only use there. And I go like, if I only knew her sooner, I would have put some of that stuff in there,
Yeah, that would have been great.
But, a lot of it, I think, it's hard to keep up with, changing politics. And you want to research, well, what's their military like? What kind of airplanes do they have? And of course, you can get a lot of that online. It just takes time researching it. But to get the real story of what kind of shape they're in, are they buying new stuff? What's current? It just takes way a lot of time. And then you spend more time researching than you might end up writing. And if you're trying to produce a lot of books, sometimes that really slows you down too much. And you kind of get to the point where you just don't do as much as you probably should. But there's that fine line between too much research and you can't use most of it. What it really gives you is a kind of an overall shell to use to build characters from. So it was, everything from finding out what's their CIA equivalent, or, their FBI. Some of them have them all combined. And that was like the CIO, discovering what it was. And then, you follow things along, and sometimes you just read an article. Like I read the article about the Chinese building a headquarters for the CIO, and they planted it right next to the uplink for the satellites that brings in and sends out all the phone data, internet data, and everything else out of Zimbabwe. So I'm going, well, isn't that nice?
Yeah, that sounds very accurate based on what I know. Yeah,
just yep. Parked right next door. So of course I had to throw that little tidbit in as causing a problem for them. So it's just little things like that you discover and you throw them in. And sometimes things you discover today have changed by tomorrow. So you can't keep up with everything. You just kind of have to write with where you are at a certain point and just let it go. And so sometimes you look back later and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or oh, I wish I'd done this instead, or whatever. But it is what it is. And I enjoyed making kind of a little bit of a romance. I did discover, the Ndebele tribe was, kind of, they had a massacre at some point, and the government killed off about 10 to 20,000. It's been a long time since I've looked at my notes, but it was a lot of people. And so, those are just really sad times. So there is a lot of tension between tribal entities. There's even tension between the tribal entities that run like the Shona that run. There's even different tribes within the Shona, and who has power has changed over now from when I wrote that book when I wrote that book, everything was in transition. Mugabe was still in control of Zimbabwe, but he was very old and he was losing power, and there was kind of a power struggle going on. So I didn't know how it was going to come out. So I just threw in there that there were a lot of people with their, hats in the ring, and who knows how it was going to come out. So you see, you make some stuff up, but that's part of it. You have to kind of take what a real situation is and kind of make it a little unreal, because you have to give all your characters one thing and the bad guy is one thing. You can't have too much gray area, or it makes your book too difficult. So that's kind of how you go about creating your stories. So.
Well, that's awesome, and yeah, you built that sense of tension between the local tribes and stuff very well into the story. So this book is the first in a two-part series. Tell us about the second book. We get to see
Well,
Joni again, right?
yeah, I was going to show you the cover. Let's see if I can. Here it is, right here. This is the second book is off the charts. And the first book, it's all about Joni rescuing the little boy, getting him out of the country. And in doing so, she gets to know this guy who is she thinks he was a wildlife manager, but he's a lot more than that. And you'll learn more even in the second book. And you move into the second book. She does, just to not ruin the first book, but she does succeed in getting the little boy out. But now she leaves behind the guy that she's kind of fallen in love with. And she has no idea if he's still alive because he goes off to kind of cover them, and she hears gunshots in the distance. And she knows that he wouldn't shoot at anybody unless he had to, because it would, give away his position. He's very savvy in the things he does. So she's worried that someone was shooting at him, but she doesn't know. And she makes it back to Zimbabwe. And of course, the people there they say they don't know anything about him. And so now she has to, she promised the little boy that one of the things he wanted was for her to get his father out. So they now have to figure out how to rescue his father out of prison in Zimbabwe, which makes it even more difficult. And they don't even know where he's at. And she also wants to go back and find out if the man she fell in love with is alive. So she kind of ends up in the second book on being allowed to go back in. So she does a little bit of training, not much, but a little before she goes in, which is the very first scene you read about. And then she heads into the country, but this time she has another one of the pilots go with her. And he's kind of an interesting guy. You don't really know where he's coming from. He's Afrikaans, but you don't know if he's a good guy, a bad guy, somewhere in between. Is he after something that we don't know about? And so the second one's a little bit more of maybe a spy thriller kind of thing. You're trying to figure out who the good and bad guys are. I kind of raised in the first book that it wasn't just about her father and the funds that he kind of knew, where all the money was that the bad guys had been squirreling away. That's too normal for these rogue countries. It had to be something a little bit more. And so what that more is, you will uncover in this book. And that's another part of the stuff that she doesn't really have all the information on that. Again, they send her in because they need her that way. And when she eventually does figure out what's going on and how she's been set up, it's very interesting. And there are some big twists in this book that you might not expect. And it's, in some ways, it's a little bit darker, but it's a little more dramatic too. So.
Oh, I'm going to have to read it for sure. So, and these are two of 8 books that you've written, and not all are in the thriller. I mean, you already talked about having written a romance. Tell us about your other books.
Well, the current series that I'm working on is actually there's 2. One is a kind of a In Today's World science fiction series. It's more like an action adventure thriller, but it has a little edge of science fiction in that the people that are in it, they're mostly humans, but there's a few that are mixed in that are very long-lived humans. They actually came here from someplace else and they're part human, but their people are dying off and they're trying to figure out what it is that's killing them and what they need to survive, for their race to survive. So they've actually come here on something called an Infinity Project. And they've signed up for 10,000 years to live on Earth and try to figure this thing out. And they've been here for about 5,000 years at this point in the story. So that's where that comes in. And it's all about how they try to keep quiet what they're doing, but yet study people, but not be too involved. So they don't change what happens because they want to try to see what is there about their human side that maybe is affecting their long lives. And so that's what the story is kind of about. But it's really kind of an action adventure thriller.
And it's called the Infinity series. What are the names of the books? And are you still working
they
on
are, it's To Die Again and To Live Again right now. And I'm just finishing right now. The next book in the series is called Just Conspire Again. And they'll all have some similar title like that. And then I actually also have a little short blurb about going back to the very first kids that were born on the planet when they came, 5,000 years ago. So it takes place way back in the Mediterranean on an island. And so that's what I've written. And that'll be a freebie that I'll be giving out probably sometime later this year when I get both those put together and come out.
Super cool.
And my other series is the Hawker Incorporated series. And that Hawker was really named for an airplane. So, okay, it's British, I know, but not American, but hey, we can survive that. And it's about a woman who is a former F-16 pilot, and she's a bit of a loner. And she finally got out of the military because she figured that she really was too individualistic. Well, if you've ever met fighter pilots, they're all kind of that way. And I say that because I have a son who's one. So
yeah.
But anyway, she gets hired, kind of ends up looking for jobs. And so she gets hired by a guy to repossess aircraft. And he tests her out and has her, you don't really get to see this scene because I cut it from the book, but she actually repossessed a Stearman aircraft in the middle of the Sun and Fun Air Show.
Oh, no way. That's so, I want to read that scene now.
Knowing that we both just did the Sun and Fun.
I know, that's so cool.
So that scene got cut, but I think it's I had it on a website, but I think I changed website since then, so it's probably down. But that was my starting scene actually, and I think I got an agent with that book, and they never could find anyone to buy it. It went through the ranks pretty quickly, and I had a lot of interest in it. But I think being a woman writing about flying, really, they didn't know how to market it. So I got really nice comments back, and I ended up, my literary company actually said they liked this so much they wanted to put it out. And that was back in the early days of ebooks coming out. So they actually put it out. And I got 3 awards from the community from it, which I'll talk about later, I think, in the writing part. So I was kind of excited about that. One of them was one of the kind of the romantic elements group that put it out. So it was kind of exciting to have that, because I do have it's very little romance in that one, but there are people in there, and it's a lot of fun. There's just different characters, and they have a lot of fun together. And it's about a woman now who she basically, in this first book that I wrote, she had to go to Brazil and repossess Gulfstream 550, which now it'd be the 650 if you want to be more up to date for the latest aircraft. But again, that was many years ago. So she repossesses aircraft, and that's what she does. But actually, the guy that runs it, he's more like a Charles, not Charles Branson, English Branson, like Virgin Airlines kind of guy, and he has a lot of things going all over the world. So he really only takes on recoveries of things that are worth his while, or have some meaning, or worth a lot of money. So she only takes on really high-end kind of repossessions. And in a book I'm working on now, she's not even repossessing a current aircraft. It's going to be a historic aircraft. And so that one, we're actually going to go through the history of the aircraft and what it did and what happened with it, while she works to figure out what happened to it and how to recover it. And so I'm really enjoying that one. And I'm in the middle of getting the research done for that now, and kind of got the story laid out. I still haven't decided exactly who the bad guy is going to be yet, because I have a lot of candidates that could be it, but you have to kind of pick which one is going to be the one. So that's what I'm kind of in the middle of working on now too. So
say the names of the repossessed, or it's repossessed.
There's Repossessed, and there's Outfoxed. And the next ones, I haven't decided on the titles yet, so we'll have to wait and see. I'm currently recovering all of those. The covers were done by other people, and that series, I don't think the covers are very conducive to looking like a series, and I just want to redo them. So I'm in the process of recovering those, and that's something I'm actually going to do on my own also. I spent the last kind of year learning how to do, taking some cover courses and learning how to do graphics and create covers and that kind of thing for them. So that's what I'm doing now. If they don't turn out like I want them, then I'll go hire somebody to do it. But I hired the last set of people to do it, and I wasn't really pleased with how it came out. So sometimes you have to do it yourself. Sometimes you're too close to it, but hopefully these will work out. So.
Is there anything else that you're working on that you want to share?
I have another book that I'm also working on, the Repossessed series, that is in takes place in the Reno Air Races. So that one's also, I've been researching that one for years. I've been to the Reno Air Races several times. I thoroughly enjoy them. Last time we went, we actually knew somebody that was flying in the races, so it was kind of fun to do the back room kind of stuff where you go with them in the evening when they're kind of doing their downtime, and you sit around the campfire and you tell flying stories basically. So that was kind of fun, and then it gives you somebody to cheer for in particular when you're watching the races, and that's been very fascinating. And that one, it's all about a lady who's a mechanic. So it's still she's
That's
on Jet's.
awesome.
Yeah, she's on Jet's team, and she's a bit of a valley girl, is the best way I could describe her. And she paints her fingernails as the country that she's working in at the moment. So if she gets sent on assignment somewhere, her fingernails will be painted in that. And of course, everyone goes, "How does she have fingernails?" Well, that's a good question. They get kind of dirty.
I love her already. I cannot wait to read that story.
The last thing on that one, hopefully it'll be out maybe next year. We'll see. It may take 2 years. I never know with my schedule, so we'll see what happens.
Well, Sandy, it sounds like you're just having a fabulously successful career as a writer. I love your creativity and imagination and the way that you pull all these things together. I love that you had to go to the races to do your research, because that's my excuse for all the things that I go off and do. Like, oh, honey, I gotta go work the Women's Air Race Classic this summer because it's research. What do you expect?
Yeah.
I got to go fly this. I got to get my tailwheel endorsement because it's research. Have to do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
I love it. And it keeps things super interesting. Well, so I want to transition into talking about writing next, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for your books, this one especially, but all of them, because it sounds like I just have so much fun stuff out there to read by you, and I can't wait. And thank you for taking the time to jump into the book club and for doing this interview. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
And